Hello, and welcome to the More Sustainable Futures Artistic Research Symposium 2021. My name is Sharid Mohammed, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Literatures and English program at the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. The title of my research paper is The Cry of Merlin, the Self-Confessional and Self-Judgemental Lament for Dismembered Landscapes, Riverscapes, Skyscapes, and Oceanscapes in the Language of Wilson Harris's Fictional Narratives. The destruction of the natural environment and its connection to global climatic changes need to be analyzed not only with the lens of scientific research but also through variable conceptions in the arts. The literary writings of Wilson Harris have made important and critical contributions to both the local and universal issues of environmental degradation and climate change. The cry of Merlin or Merlin's cry is present in Wilson Harris's theoretical and fictional works, particularly in his essay Merlin and Parsifal, Adversarial Twins. Wilson Harris claims that there lingers an unspoken apprehension of an incalculable price to be paid in pollution, in the extinction of species, and in other elemental implosive cycles which leave their shadow upon the psyche of nature. Wilson Harris termed such unspoken apprehension as a cry of Merlin or Merlin's cry. This cry or quality of voice stimulates humanity's self-confessional and self-judgemental awareness of a dismembered natural environment. Most importantly, readers can trace Merlin's incomprehensible cry or lament in the language of Harris's fiction. It is Harris's claim that literary artists should be imbued with a sensation of profound necessity in the life of the imagination to visualize links between technology and living landscapes in continuously new ways that takes nothing for granted in an increasingly violent and materialistic world. Subsequently, the haunting and necessary proportions of a new dialogue with the reality of an anatomy or shared body everywhere in all things can be represented in the language of fiction. This research argues that Harris's use of metaphorical language in his fictional novels breaches the hubris of technological progress and echoes a quality of voice or redemptive cry for the fate of nature. This research will further demonstrate that the dense metaphorical language of Harris's fictional works can assist both our understanding and offers an illuminating perspective of the dismemberment of the natural world by humanity's ruthless logic of materialism. It is Harris's claim that his surveying expeditions into the deep forested rainforests of Guyana in the 1940s and early 1950s allowed him to become intimately and profoundly involved with the landscapes and riverscapes of Guyana. Subsequently, he sensed over the years that the landscape possessed a resonance. The landscape possessed a life and was like an open book. Harris felt that the alphabet of the landscape which he worked with was all around him. However, Harris contends that it takes some time to really grasp what this alphabet is and what the book of the living landscape is. Harris contends that his experience of the Guyanese hinterland staggered his realistic perception of the physical landscape. There was thus a shift that occurred in the premises of his reading the reality in the sky, in the land, in the river, everywhere. Subsequently, Harris contends that his recognition of these things in the landscapes began to secrete themselves into metaphoric images in the language of his fictional novels. It is noteworthy to mention that Derek Walcott is another writer from the Anglophone Caribbean who also wrote about his perception of the physical landscape. Like Harris, Walcott also experienced a shift in reading the reality in the sky, in the land, in the river, in the ocean, and everywhere. Walcott's vision of the living landscapes can be found in his essay Isla Incognita, an essay that was written in 1972 but published in 2005. And this is what Walcott has to say. It has taken me over 30 years and my race hundreds to feel the fibers spread from displayed toes and grip this earth, the arms that knot into bowls and put out leaves. When that begins, this is the beginning of season, cycle time. The noise my leaves make is my language. In it is tunneled the roar of seas of a lost ocean. It is a fresh sound. Where does Harris get this notion of the cry of Merlin? He actually illustrates this concept from the Arthurian legend. And Harris says that Merlin, the great magician of the Arthurian Round Table, was trapped in a tree or cave. He symbolizes in tradition a network of association involving forests and caves which became his prison house. He felt himself betrayed by the very dragon of knowledge he courted and exploited. Parsifal, his adversarial twin, who benefited enormously at times from his wisdom, remained apparently superior to nature in advancing technologies. Parsifal nevertheless was also a prisoner, the prisoner of inflexible sovereignty, sovereign institution, sovereign ego, in which he more or less successfully manipulated. Both Merlin and Parsifal are prisoners, I would venture to say, but Parsifal has long arrogated onto himself the banner of justified conquest in the realism of war, trade, money, and privilege. The language of Parsifalian ideology is now, one would think, part and parcel of the formerly colonized globe. Everyone writes and thinks in virtually the same fashion or mode, but fashion is still subject to unease and eruptive element arising from the subconscious and unconscious in a trap to imprison magic Merlin. That eruptive element is a cry of Merlin. It is left therefore to Merlin, however apparently incomprehensible his cry, to imply a creative breach in the seemingly invincible core bias of communication which Parsifal has framed and enshrined. Harris's notion of linkages between humanity and the living landscapes is rooted in the pre-Columbian tradition of a profound and unusual treaty of sensibility between human presence on this planet and the physical environment. Harris asserts that this pre-Columbian treaty of sensibility are signals which are planted in the landscape. It is Harris's view that this intricate and invisible connection between humanity and the living landscapes are ancient vestiges of synchronicity or linkages that are acausal and stagger our human logic of cause and effect realism. Such ancient vestiges of synchronicity are quantum links, according to Harris. So quantum physics serves as a philosophical anchorage for Harris's alteration of the text of the English language to represent the quantum links or quantum texts of the living landscapes. Harris illustrates from the concepts of quantum entanglement and quantum superposition to validate his representation of those linkages between humanity and the living landscapes in the metaphoric images of his fiction. It is noteworthy to mention that Harris's treaty of sensibility or quantum linkage is in rapport with Barrad's ethico onto epistemology. Barrad's ethico onto epistemology can be regarded as a form of quantum entanglement. In this quantum linkage, humans are not simply innocent bystanders observing the world from a freestanding perspective, but they must be ethically accountable for the natural environment. As Barrad puts it, humans, like other parts of nature, are of the world, not in the world, and surely not outside of it looking in. We are responsible not only for the knowledge that we seek, but in part for what exists. The populist technological progress is one that is suffused by fixed policies within various economic and political fortress institutions of many industrialized countries. Such established legislation sometimes serve to mask the reality of a voiceless, endangered environment. It therefore suffocates real and genuine dialogue in spite of the numerous contrivances of public relations it may promote in the name of environmental awareness. The use of technology to harvest and consume the Earth's resources have resulted in environmental abuse, and yet ironically, there remains a profound desire for preservation and conservation. Moreover, the involvement in threatened species and landscapes by man-made materials, and above all the mistranslation of the turbulent energies of climate change, has made humanity blind to the strange, disturbing, and echoic cry of nature. This resonating signal or Merlin's cry from the natural environment represents a breach in the treaty of sensibility between human presence and the living landscapes on this planet. Merlin's cry is a callous rupturing of the acausal or quantum links of the landscapes, riverscapes, skyscapes, and oceanscapes. Such quality of voice in ourselves is elusive, it can't be seized. It is the essence of living diversity which tends in a progressive age to be flattened, according to Harris. The self-judgment and self-confession that it evokes in humans generate a discontinuity within technological imperatives or the rule of machines. Such a caveat may lead to a transformation or conversion of a ruling scientific ego to an understanding of the indeterminate yet coherent unity of being among all landscapes. This indeterminate unity of being, or quantum entanglement, undermines the perception of the Earth's activities as conforming to a strict statistical formula or themed identity. The shamanic writer such as Wilson Harris is therefore susceptible to comprehending and becoming genuinely involved with the innermost acausal cycles of planet Earth that defy relativistic cause and effect reality. This illuminating quantum vision would allow the writer to translate those implicit disruptions or cries of the Earth's protective linkages between human presence and the natural environment. The breach in such acausal or quantum links in nature by human technological progress arises to affect the language of Harris's fiction. The shamanistic quantum vision of these entanglements causes a rare pressure of imagery within Harris's linear mental contours or configurations of the landscapes. They loom into Harris with such astonishing echoic force that he can no longer remain blind to them. His mental linear configurations or fixed causal boundaries of the landscape are now replaced by non-configuration or acausality. According to Harris, in describing the world you see, the language evolves and begins to encompass realities that are not visible. This fissure in the invisible or quantum linkages between humanity and living landscapes erupts as a ventriloquist of spirit, or Merlin's cry in the obscure clusters of imageries in Harris's fiction. Here is an example from his novel, The Four Banks of the River of Space, and I now quote, "I threw the knife far up into space. It glittered, it flashed. It was a conveyor, a satellite of knowledge. It glittered, it flashed. Then all at once it shot like lightning into the body of a flying creature. I heard the flying creature's long, sweet, poignant, bitter lament, as if a note had struck in the darkest recesses of melodic conscience. The lightning knife had found its mark. The winged, dancing, flying bird appeared to pause in the twinkling of an eye within us, within inner space, glimmering stillness yet lightning apprehension of the geology of the tides through which to build the architecture of the city of God, or to topple El Dorado into further ruin. The angelic dancer fell with open outstretched wings. It fell downwards, or was it backwards into the upturned vessel of the sky in which the sun shone like a pool star within a drought of cloud? Glimmering star sun or floating eyelid of the abyss. I listened for the splintering note of the knife upon the head of rock, but heard nothing. I was unsure. Did the dancer and the knife fall and rise upon an ozone door, a toppled ruined tidal door, in the greenhouse drought spectre of earth and sky? Every epitaph for a dying savage tribe, angel of beauty witnesses to an abyss we need to visualize. Distances and architectures we have befouled. An abyss between a knife in the sky and a knife on the earth, a double-edged knife. It pierces us with the necessity for a visionary change of heart, for a new sculpture of being. In the previous extract, the knife represents those man-made excavations or fissures into those acausal linkages in the living landscapes that support the Earth's life-sustaining cycles. These man-made cuts into the quantum fabric of nature results in Merlin's painful cry. The destruction of the quantum links between the landscapes, skyscapes, riverscapes, and oceanscapes are represented in the incoherent images of the dancer and the knife that fall and rise upon an ozone door, a toppled ruined tidal door in the greenhouse drought spectre of earth and sky. However, the translation of Merlin's cry into humanity's ruthless logic of a cause and effect reality staggers and forces the reader to visualize the severed linkages or architectures that we have befouled. Moreover, the living landscapes in the previous extract operate in a quantum entanglement and quantum superposition of simultaneous states, since they seem to be in parallel places at the same time. The acausal linkages or treaty of sensibility between humanity and the landscapes are clothed and redressed in counterintuitive images such as the ozone door that is interfused with the tidal door in the greenhouse drought spectre of Earth. This is the obscure textual reality of the living landscapes that only the shamanic writer such as Harris could hear and see. Harris contends that through the art of language, such acausal connections or interweaving implicitly raises a reality that cannot be glossed by appeals to poetic ornament or picturesque metaphor. The hinge of their expression implies an architecture of imagination, fueled by a new conceptual language in which the sense organs of creation elicit a quality of voice and expression unlike conventional, one-track progressive realism. Such quantum links between the living landscapes are therefore achieved in language or word. The translation of those untranslatable sights, sounds, feelings, thoughts, utterances, and rhythms from the living landscape into the English language represents Harris's spatial logic, or convertible property of the imagination. The representation of an acausal reality within human language therefore becomes a psychophysical medium of communication. The quantum vision of those acausal linkages in the landscape is also present in Harris's other novels, such as The Infinite Rehearsal. In this novel, there is an eruption of Merlin's cry as human technological progress breaches the delicate quantum links of the living landscapes in the following clusters of imageries. And I now quote, "I asked ghosts who flew in the shadow of a wave on a hill, but his lips were sealed through a strange cry, trembled in the recesses of the coming skull, but remained short of utterance. I raised my hat to Faust, as a flock of my terrors skimmed the wave and settled on the ground in the belly of the sacred wood. The wood was in a state of alarm, and indeed I sensed a change in the disposition of the tenant in my shadow. Ghost was alarmed and uneasy at the intrusion of brute climates, brute absolutes, in the communication of ideas under the sea and over the sea that Faust had converted into a machine. Fish of steel, fish of lead, fish of iron, birds of steel, birds of lead, birds of iron. The mechanics of the circus of power on sea, on land, made Ghost tremble on his flying trapeze in the belly of the sacred wood. The mechanics of domination in the name of brute prosperity, or in the name of brute necessity. The flying creature's long, sweet, poignant, bitter lament, or Merlin's cry, that is struck in the darkest recesses of melodic conscience from the four banks of the river of space, appears in this novel as the strange cry. The pollution of the living landscapes is represented in images such as fish of steel, fish of lead, fish of iron, birds of lead, birds of iron. The umbilical cord or quantum link of the living landscapes have been severed, and subsequently the earth signals a warning of brute climates. It is this breach of the asymmetrical network of associations in the living landscapes that resonates with Johann Rockström's notion of planetary boundaries framework. According to Rockström, transgressing one or more planetary boundaries may be deleterious or even catastrophic due to the risk of crossing thresholds that will trigger nonlinear, abrupt environmental change within continental scale to planetary scale systems. For instance, the deforestation in the Amazon may reduce water resource availability in Asia, according to Rockström. Rockström's theory of planetary boundaries is mentioned because it achieves an explicit correspondence with Harris's shamanistic Treaty of Sensibility perspective. Harris, in fact, did theorize that humanity's fissuring of the Earth's natural cycles would result in catastrophic consequences. As Harris puts it, nature is not passive, nature erupts into orchestras of nemesis. It is significant to note that both Harris and Rockström in their involuntary association share a certain kinship for humanity's self-responsibility for dismembered landscapes. Harris's perspective that humanity should achieve a narrow scale of self-preservation and maintain this within a diverse species that they manipulate or exploit shares a similarity to Rockström's call for humanity to ensure that there is a mutual alliance between technological progress and the living landscapes. This treaty of sensibility is highlighted in Rockström's words. Humanity thus needs to become an active steward of all planetary boundaries in order to avoid risk of disastrous long-term social and environmental disruption. Perhaps a fusion of environmental science with a shamanistic visualization of the living landscapes can bring about a genuine creative conscience and redemptive change of heart and mind towards the interconnectedness of all species, beings, and things. So, I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. Thank you very much.